Hello, and thanks for tuning into Compass Media. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. The SNP has a new leader voted in today, John Swinney. Mr. Swinney is replacing Hamza Jousaf, who was in the position for not a very long time and seems to have upset a lot of people in that short period of time that he was leader of the SNP and leader of the Scottish Assembly. I'm joined today by a current member of the SNP, who's also a former elected member of the Scottish Assembly for the SNP. And we've spoken to Lloyd before on Compass Media, and he's a very straightforward kind of a guy. His main and only objective is absolute Scottish independence and sovereignty. And I'm going to talk to Lloyd for a few minutes now about what is going on in the SNP, what happened with this Hamza Jousaf fella, and who is John Swinney. Thanks for joining us again today, Lloyd.
Great to be here, Finbar. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Everything is so up in the air with the SNP and with the struggle for Scottish independence. This Hamza Jousaf fella, I've been looking at why he retired in the British broadstream newspapers, especially The Guardian, and they seem to think that it has nothing to do with the Scottish independence campaign. In fact, they say that nobody in Scotland wants to have a second referendum. But what they're saying is it was about a deposit return scheme. It was about the fact that he tried to force in gender recognition legislation in spite of the UK-wide Equal Status Act. What happened to Hamza Jousaf, and who is John Swinney, or Swinney, as I should say? It sounds very much like Sweeney, an Irish name there. What happened to Jousaf, Lloyd?
Well, you know, to start at the very beginning, as they often say in Disney movies, Hamza was effectively the continuity choice of the previous First Minister who had stood down, Nicola Sturgeon. Hamza was very close to her, shared the same ideology. So there was a contest just over a year ago. Hamza won that contest narrowly, and he continued the SNP agreement with the Green Party. And the Green Party in Scotland has proven itself to be the green tail wagging the yellow SNP dog. And I think that led to certainly decisions about the progress of legislation that got Hamza into deep trouble. But just on the issue of independence, Finbar, this is really important background here. Current support for independence in all the opinion polls is above 50%. It varies between 51 and 54. And that's been the case for a number of years now. And that's without any discernible independence campaign since the referendum in 2014. Compare that with the following. The Scottish National Party, the tip of the spear, supposedly, of the independence movement, is currently polling at 30%. That's a full 20 to 23% less than support for independence. Yet, Hamza Jousaf's SNP made no moves on independence. So to some degree, Hamza has lost the faith of his own party membership, and that was forcing him into a difficult corner. But more importantly than that, the parties in the parliament had submitted last week proposals for a vote of no confidence. And when it became clear that Hamza could not carry the vote of no confidence, but mainly because he refused to do a deal with the single member of the Alapa party, who is in the Scottish Parliament at present, a woman called Ash Regan, who made John a straightforward three-part offer. The first part was positive action on the achievement of independence, positive action on good governance, and protection of women and girls in light of the GRRB bill and the Hate Crime Act. He refused, after having been nobbled by what are termed the men in grey kilts. And it is now clear that Hamza could have won a vote of no confidence in the Scottish Parliament had he been prepared to do that deal. But the Scottish National Party will brook no deal with the Alapa Party, because the Alapa Party is led by Alex Salmond, the previous First Minister, and indeed the previous successful First Minister of the Scottish National Party. Now, all of these things kind of tie together. The vote of no confidence was in Hamza because of failed policy. You mentioned a couple of them. The deposit return scheme, a very, very simple thing where you take bottles, cans, and you get a deposit on them and they're returned. Well, we managed to create a scheme which ended up not being taken forward, but cost in excess of £180 million. That was a Green policy, but Hamza backed it. The hate crime bill, which does not, and this is the quite extraordinary thing about it, the hate crime bill does not include misogyny. Now, that effectively meant that 50% or 51% of our population who are female found that an absolutely contemptible position to take. And indeed, some of those very same women have been subject to police action under this new Hate Crime Act for supposed online hate crimes against trans rights activists. But within that hate crime bill, there is no protection for women and girls against the misogyny that they face on a daily basis in our society. So the whole picture of Hamza falling is primarily due to his inability to do politics. And that's partly to do with the fact that because we had effectively a dictatorship, a single-person dictatorship under Nicola Sturgeon for 9 years, all of the politicians who have arisen during her tenure are those who lack critical facilities. And as a result of that, I think what we see from today, most especially with the return of a failed leader of the Scottish National Party, namely John Swinney, the return of John Swinney today will continue the spiral down of the Scottish National Party. But the problem for us is when independence is at 53% in the polls and the people want it, and the party that is supposed to deliver it, that has the mechanisms by being our current government, is only polling at 30%, then we're in a strange cleft stick, as it were. And I think there's going to be a shift and a movement within Scottish politics towards more independent-minded candidates. And I think that will be, ultimately, that will be Hamza's legacy.
Doesn't every country have its own particular key issue or a couple of key issues? And then they have this multitude of issues that we share. So when you're looking at, for instance, some of the things you described Hamza as pushing in spite of significant public resistance or a lack of public consultation, could it be bracketed or characterized as, to use the phrase, woke issues quite often? And it seems to be something that's happening not just in Scotland or not just within the Scottish National Party, but in every major political party across the European continent, and even to a degree in the United States. There's decision-making on massive issues like, for instance, when we take gender recognition, that issue, that is something that has been standard in our existence for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And to make decisions about that without proper consultation with the public, you can see how that would peeve people off. He's still alive, I guess. Is Hamza Jousaf a typical career politician? Because the description you're giving to me is just another Rishi Sunak without the billions.
Well, yes, without the millions, very much so. No, it's interesting. Hamza will say that he fully supports the woke ideology, and he had to, because to succeed in Nicola Sturgeon's SNP, absolute subservience to the woke ideology was an absolute given. It had to operate that way to deliver what she wanted. But what Hamza, as a practicing Muslim, interestingly did at each stage when any of the bills which were related directly to this woke ideology, he somehow managed to find himself with meetings outside of the Parliament building, or was unable to vote. So in reality, though he presided over the deliverance of these what shall we term, noxious pieces of legislation, he never actually physically voted for them himself. He protected his position within his own religion, while at the same time driving forward an ideology that he had to subscribe to get that job. If he had not subscribed to the woke ideology, then Nicola Sturgeon would never have anointed him effectively as her successor. But another issue I'd like to talk about, where you talk about the spread of this woke ideology and the lack of consultation. Well, I've kind of followed the debate in Ireland, in your country, and I compare and contrast how Varadkar and your government drove through this legislation utterly and completely by stealth. Is my interpretation. Would I be wrong in that?
To the degree that often members of parliament were shocked by it, that it was almost coming to final votes before. And a part of that is their own failing for not having full control and handle of everything that's happening within the houses of the Oireachtas. But at the same time, every effort is made to ensure that there is the least amount of discussion as possible. You might have something that's discussed for an hour or two. That's it, that all questions are stopped after that. And then it just moves and trundles forward and is suddenly manifested as reality. So
well, the methodology
there is awakening up in Ireland, in the sense that it's a terrible thing for the governing classes when the working class starts to seek out the news and starts to become a lot more determinate and discriminating in how they analyze and assess what's going on in the country. And that's what's happening in Ireland. And I've got a feeling you've touched upon it in your last commentary, where you said that the people in Scotland were starting to waken up, that there are other options there. Just on that, Alba, would you describe Alba? I know you're a member of SNP, but would you describe Alba as certainly a part of the future of Scottish independence, even when it comes to the woke question and things like that?
The woke question is I mean, I'll come back to that. We'll just finish off on the woke issue. Now, an element of stealth in Ireland. What happened in Scotland was they prepared the legislation and identified the third sector and voluntary sector organisations that they were going to consult with to get the answer that they wanted. They then funded those third sector organisations, asked them about the Gender Recognition Reform Bill and the Hate Crime Act, and took all their consultations and accepted whatever was given back to them, because effectively they were being told by their own clients, exactly what the government wanted to hear. And as a result of that, from the beginning in Scotland, the people have been told, oh no, this was consulted upon. There's been a biggest consultation we've ever had. The fact that they only accepted consultation from those who were on their side has been ignored. And as a result of that, that's why it's beginning to crumble here. But I think it's interesting that political parties, both in Ireland and Scotland, who have developed relationships with the United States over the past 10, 15 or 20 years particularly, all seem to be, this is in Ireland, to some degree with Plaid Cymru and Wales as well, and across Europe. This woke ideology, particularly the self-ID element of gender recognition, it comes directly from the United States. You know, you have an admiral, a man with 3 children, who now wears the uniform of a female admiral in the United States and is right at the center and at the top of government. I think we would be foolish and we would be wrong to think that there weren't broader and outside forces operating, and they come from the United States. This whole ideology seems to be a product of the United States. Now, I don't see it as being a product of Republican ideology. I don't see it as part of being Democratic ideology. It has to be coming from American capital. And I think that's really where we're going to get to the heart of where this strange kind of plague of ideas has come. And I think it's directly related to the potential monetization that can happen for big American pharmaceutical companies who are driving this ideology. It also has, of course, another effect, which is because the woke ideology, to a greater or lesser degree, certainly in Scotland, is the preserve of the middle classes. It's the preserve of managerial mediocrities and their children. I do not see the pink and blue flags hanging from lampposts in working class areas, but I do from student accommodation in the centre of Edinburgh. The woke ideology is more divisive than we would perceive, because it has become the area of campaigning, the area of rebellion, the area of the vision of the future entirely from within the middle class. Nobody else is involved in this, and it is in some ways it kind of explains the middle class mentality, which is, I am special, I have some knowledge, I am of the elite. Look, my child is special because my child has decided at the age of 8 that though it's a boy, it's now a girl, or though it's a girl, it's now a boy. Now, that kind of, for want of a better kind of description of kind of exceptionalism that these people have developed, fits perfectly with this ideology, and completely, in the end, woke ideology is the counter to collective action. It's about the idea that of the absolute individual, that individualistic determination is the future, and nothing is more dangerous than the unity of the working class and the achievement of working class equality than the middle class to take control of politics and make it all about things which are actually fragmenting social unity, which are completely atomizing that idea of the collective. And that, to me, is the most dangerous part of the woke ideology, is that it divides ordinary people against ordinary people.
The new leader of the SNP, Lloyd, this Joseph Swinney, what's he like? Is he woke? Will he be woke?
John Swinney will carry through the project that was begun by Nicola Sturgeon. That's why John Swinney is the First Minister of Scotland, and why any challenges to him in the non-contest we've just had over a week were all removed, because there's a necessity to drive through this ideology. And you know, let's not kid ourselves. Nicola Sturgeon is very firmly still in the game here, if somewhat behind the curtain while she's being part of the game. It's her baby, and she will not stand by quietly and let someone take what she worked so hard to achieve and throw it in the bucket. It shows a certain psychopathy, I would suggest, but that's another issue for another time. John is not woke. John is what's required. If best description I can give, he was the leader. He wasn't leader of the party when I was elected. He became leader during the time I was a member of the Scottish Parliament. And John's ineffectiveness, you know, if you wanted to write a book on ineffectiveness in politics, then John Swinney's your go-to man. You know, that's just a straightforward fact.
Even the book wouldn't be effective.
Yeah, exactly. John's not woke. He's a party loyalist. But the strange thing about John's party loyalty is, for most people I know in the party, you're loyal to the idea, which is independence, first and foremost, and to the party secondly, but only because the party is the means by which. But as we've discovered in the 25 years that we've had a Scottish Parliament, is that certain elements of the SNP have shifted further and further and further to the position of devolution. Now, can you imagine a circumstance anywhere if in 2014, when you go into a referendum with a single question being, do you want Scotland to be an independent country? You start the campaign at 27% and you hit 45% by the day of the election. Subsequent to that, you then win all but 3 of the Westminster constituency seats, which had never ever happened for the Scottish National Party before. You then have government for 9 years, but during that time, the increase in support for independence is sizable, but the reduction in support for the SNP is considerably more sizable. Tells you something about the priorities of the elected politicians of the SNP, and John particularly, because John's been at the heart of this right from the very beginning. And John will claim that it is, we all must keep quiet for the sake of party unity. But that party unity is only prepared to deliver us devolution. Therefore, an awful lot of people are not being quiet at the moment. But John would say that so long as the Scottish National Party has the largest number of elected members at every single level, then the party is winning. I would say, if you're playing British politics and your metric for success is the number of people that you get elected in the British system, then you're using the wrong metric.
Is he a home ruler or a devolutionist more than he is a man that would want to seek direct, immediate independence and sovereignty in its complete form? Is he more of what the Irish might describe as a home ruler?
Yes, there's no question about that. But, you know, let me put the question a slightly different way. You've just been elected leader of the leading party of independence. Your party is at 30%. Support for independence is at 52%. You've just been given the opportunity to lead your country to the United Nations and to independence. Your speech didn't mention independence. Your acceptance speech as the new First Minister, he did not get up and take the opportunity to say, right, folks, I'm in charge now and it's full speed ahead. The next election that we have will be a plebiscite election whereby a vote for an independent supporting party is a vote for independence. And when we have the maximum number of seats or the maximum number of votes, then we begin negotiations. What an opportunity he had today to restate his position and to stake his claim to being the guy who will deliver. When asked the question directly yesterday, you know, do you believe you'll be the First Minister who delivers independence? John gave an emphatic yes, and then has not for 24 hours mentioned the word independence.
What did
John is the safest pair of British hands you could possibly get, emerging from within the Scottish National Party to lead the Scottish National Party and, more damagingly, be the First Minister of our Parliament.
And so what has he been talking about over the last even 4 or 5 days?
He's been talking about the same things as all British politicians do. You know, what are the buzzwords of the moment? We have to address the cost of living crisis. The cost of living crisis? When we're an occupied country that is currently, you know, is receiving 8% of our total domestic product is returned to us to run our country. But John thinks you can address the cost of living crisis while we stay within the United Kingdom, who created the cost of living crisis. You know, where's the joined up thinking here? We have to protect our NHS. You know, effectively, this could have been Keir Starmer. It could have been, you know, any British politician stating the obvious. Now, anyone in any organisation that has a unique selling point, and the SNP has a unique selling point, it's the party of independence. Why, oh, why would anybody attempt to fight the political battle on ground laid out for you by the British state rather than striking out for yourself? He had the opportunity today to say, right, this is it, we're on the move. And he chose not to, because John's not that kind of guy. As I said earlier, to some degree, he's a product of that same mediocre managerial class that we have in Scotland, that has been the bane of our country. They despise and loathe the people below them, and they aspire to being the people above them. And ultimately, if you live in a monarchy, what do you aspire to? What's the top job in real terms? And I think until we rid ourselves, our politicians rid ourselves of that British mentality of playing entirely and completely to the British rules rather than bending them and breaking them to suit our people and the needs of our country, then we're kind of stuck. And you know, the story with John is it's Back to the Future, it's Groundhog Day, it's deja vu. Tell me one thing, please, members of the Scottish National Party's elected group. Why do you believe that someone who failed so miserably only 21 years ago will now be the one who leads us to the promised land? It's an illusion. And it's an illusion as a result of delusion.
It sounds a bit depressing from a Scottish independent point of view at the moment. Not the lay of the ground itself, which, as you say, there is a majority support for another referendum in independence. But it's a bit depressing when you look at the spectres on the stage, the political stage. But at the same time, and I know you're a member of the SNP, I don't want to get you in trouble, but I'd like to close off with a little bit of hope of some sort here. I know that the ALBA party, which you referred to earlier, which is led by Alex Salmond, former leader of the SNP, and the man that got the referendum for Scotland and then resigned without any conspiracy around him for resigning. He resigned as he said he was going to do when he achieved that goal. He's now leading the ALBA party. So there's two prongs to this question. Prong one, or prong A, is, do you have a sense within the SNP that there are rumblings from the grassroots in terms of both Swinney and Jousaf in terms of their leadership? Has there been rumblings, and is there rumblings? And secondly, outside of the SNP, do you see opportunity for ALBA, that gap that you were talking about between, on the one hand, the popular support for independence and the support for SNP? Is ALBA capable of filling in that gap?
I'm not certain that currently ALBA are in a position to fill that gap, because we still have a mainstream media that treats Alex Salmond as if he'd been found guilty in the courts a couple of years ago. And there are a couple of court cases, a particular court case coming up very soon, where some information that hasn't emerged into the broader public will become clearer and clearer. And hopefully then people will begin to reassess Alex Salmond. But there's a general principle, is that Alex Salmond is tainted goods, therefore no one wants to talk about him, no one wants to have any dealings with him. Now, that circumstance will change. At the moment, I think ALBA are kind of stuck. They haven't had that breakthrough moment yet. I'm sure that they will get it, but whether it will be this year or not, I'm not sure. But what I take the greatest sense of positivity from is there's a broad debate in the wider movement, and the wider movement includes people like myself who are still members of the Scottish National Party, those many thousands, tens of thousands of people who have left the Scottish National Party and have not become attached. But so that polity is still there. But one thing that is emerging, and it's really, really important, is people are beginning to emerge who have been politically active in the national movement for a number of years, are now putting themselves forward as independent candidates. And some of them are of a very, very high quality, particularly, I would name two just now, Eva Comrie, who's standing in Alloa and Grangemouth, and Sally Hughes, who's standing in Perthshire. Both of them have got a great contribution to make to our polity if they're given the opportunity. And I think there could be some shock results, but I think what we know is the movement is in good health. It lacks, because we play within the British rules, it lacks a central point of leadership at the moment, which has always been the Scottish National Party. Now, anyone who thinks the Scottish National Party is going to change back rapidly to being that tip of the spear of the national movement, I think is living in fantasy land. But what can happen, and I think may happen as a result of pressure from within the SNP, some people in the SNP are beginning to realise that they may be going down the road of the Irish Parliamentary Party of 1918, that they may find themselves in a similar circumstance. And much of the talk is about a constitutional convention. Now, that would be the equivalent of the formation of the Dáil after the British general election in Ireland in 1918-19. Now, that idea, I think, will come to fruition. There are plans afoot amongst the many. The movement is united behind the concept of independence, but there are many strands within the movement operating in different areas, all collegiate when they need to be. And hopefully later this year, those groups will come together in a constitutional convention, to which it would be foolish for the Scottish National Party not to take part. So my faith is in the independent candidates. The fact that independence is now at a higher level than it was when we had our first opportunity in 2014. The only downside is that the party who could make it happen by next Friday are choosing not to do that. And we're going to have to address that issue. But the fact that the idea is not dead. Like when you spoke earlier about what you'd been reading in the British broadsheets, the British broadsheets don't keep up to speed with what goes on in, you know, the colonial outpost that is Jockland. So they don't, you know, the number of you, the Guardian, independence is not an issue for the people of Scotland. I'm sorry. If 53% of the people are saying this is the answer to all our ills, then I'm sorry, you should be paying attention to that. But it's typical. It's typical British exceptionalism, and most especially in a newspaper I loved when I was a teenager, a newspaper I wouldn't wipe my arse with it these days. The Guardian is not what it was. And it shows in what it said about the fall of Hamza and the current situation in Scotland. It has no real understanding of what is going on here.
I think it's good for wistful teenagers who like to read a little bit of Yeats every so often. But when we get older, we realise it's a broadsheet like most other broadsheets. Yeah. Lloyd Quinan, thanks a million for joining us again today, and I'm sure you'll join us again nearly in the future. Just on a final note, do you think over the next 6 months to a year that a bit of energy might be driven back into the independence campaign in Scotland by any means, not necessarily through the SNP? Because on the one hand, you're regularly on through Scottish Prism. I watches. I'm sometimes a panelist on that myself. And there's the energy that I get from the likes of yourself, from Eva, from Barhead Boys, to call them, from Roddy, and from the guys that I've met via through Scottish Prism and the campaign that just have. The energy is have the eloquence, the intelligence, just have it all. When is this going to start really getting traction with you guys? Is it?
It has to be this. It is beginning to happen, Finbar. Hopefully there'll be a couple of initiatives over the next couple of months that will maybe put power back into the hands of the activists, back into the hands possibly also of the electorate. We need to break the logjam, and the only way to do that is by standing outside of the political parties as they stand. You know, the running theme, I think, for what I've been saying today is our politicians become so locked into the British system they can't see the wood from the trees, whereas those that are not elected but are politically active can see exactly what's going on. So most of those will have and are already beginning to say, John is now the leader. We can expect no movement from within the SNP because John is a home ruler and a safe pair of hands for the British. So we have to go outside of it. And I think that's a positive, because in some ways there had to have been the similar kind of chats as, you know, I'm not making a direct equivalence. That would be insulting to both our countries. But I am sure there must have been talks amongst the disparate groups of the national movement in Ireland prior to that general election that destroyed the Irish Parliamentary Party, that then allowed the instant creation of that Dáil. If we can do the same to the SNP, and from that we get our constitutional convention, our, you know, pretend version of the 1918, 1919 Dáil, then that for me would be a far, far more positive move forward than the election of another 30, 40 or 50 SNP members of the Westminster Parliament. You know, in some ways, one of the things we have to seriously start thinking about is withdrawing our consent. And withdrawing your consent from Westminster by simply not attending, not on an abstentionist basis as Sinn Féin for good historical reasons does. We don't have that same historical background to give it that level of merit. But what we have to do is work outside and within their rules. There's no requirement for members of the Scottish National Party to be on committees of the Westminster Parliament. All the central issues to our people are dealt with in our own Parliament, our Scottish Parliament. There's no requirement for them to be on the Defence Committee. There's no requirement for them to sit for hours and hours and hours getting skelfs in their bum, sitting on the green leather, just, you know, to ask questions where they're completely and utterly ignored. There's no requirement for us, our polity, to grant legitimacy to the British government and the British system. We have to begin to withdraw from it. And the first withdrawals are not standing in elections. It's when elected, being extremely careful about your use of your time and your attendance. There's no requirement for us to be there for Prime Minister's questions. There's no need for us to be there. All of these staged events within the Westminster Parliament, we need to start withholding our consent, and our elected members have to realise that that's the next step in the battle.
I think in terms of the history of Scottish English, or even Scottish British relations, if you want to put it that way, if and when that begins, it will be the sensation of centuries. Nothing will have happened like that in such relations for a long time. And as you've made the point on a previous show on M-Compass Media, from a fiscal point of view, Scotland would certainly be quids in. Lloyd, thanks for joining us today. I'll be talking to you over the next few weeks to have you back, because we know that things are developing in Scotland and it's our sister nation, so we want to keep our finger on the pulse with that. Once more, Lloyd, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Finbar. Thank you very much.